Dreamland. Welcome to one of the world's greatest mysteries, the mystery of Fulcanelli and the Secret of Alchemy. Jay Weidner has been on the trail of Fulcanelli and the Secrets of Alchemy since 1986. In his book, The Mysteries of the Great Cross of Hendaye and a Monument to the End of Time, Jay cracked the code of this mysterious pillar of Hendaye. He used that pillar as a needle to thread together a profound tapestry of secrets about our galactic center and this very moment in time in which we live. Jay's a Hermetic scholar, he's a filmmaker, and a husband to the beautiful Sharon Rose. A Dreamland favorite, he returns with his Fulcanelli-inspired must-see DVD, Secret of Alchemy, The Great Cross and the End of Time. And you need to get it from the Unknown Country store right now. Buy the DVD. Watch it. What Jay is offering is a major clue to the mystery of our times. Jay, welcome to Dreamland.
Hey, William.
Hey, it's great to have you here. How are you?
I'm great. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, it's a nice turn of events for me. I remember back in August 1999 going to Boulder, Colorado to hear a lecture given by you and your writing partner, Vincent Bridges, when the Monument to the End of Time came out. It's great to be here for the unveiling of Secret of Alchemy.
Yeah, well, thanks. That was a great conference that we had back then.
Yeah, it was just absolutely ripe with all kinds of possibilities. Nobody really knew what was going to happen at the time of the millennium, and now here we sit 5 years later. What's your latest take, the forecast on where things are at in terms of fulfillment of prophecies and the era that we're moving into presently?
Well, it's getting more and more interesting lately. I think that where we're moving would seem to solidify the predictions that the Hendaye Cross and Fulcanelli and others like Nostradamus have made about this time. I think we're moving into a very, very serious time in world history, also a very hopeful time. I think that the recent events since 2001, 9/11, have given us all pause. I think that also that 9/11 is probably going to go down as a seminal event in world history, changing everything that's occurred afterwards, and including the last election last week. I think that all these things are culminating into something that is so big and beyond anything that's happened before that I can only stand in awe of Fulcanelli's predictions from 1926 and the Cross of Hendaye's predictions from almost 400 years ago. And when you include that in with the fact that every year since 1992, the weather has gotten much worse. The heat every year is hotter than the year before. There are weather storms that shouldn't be, tornadoes in the south, and more hurricanes than ever. The whole thing begins to seem as if something's unraveling, and I think that something is history itself.
Yeah, well said. We have a lot of new listeners, Jay, probably even since the last time you were on the program, so let's take a moment to bring everyone up to speed. I'd like to give you a few terms and have you define them for us based upon your research. Let's start with Fulcanelli.
All right. Fulcanelli is really what you might call the last alchemist. As you probably know, but maybe many of your listeners do not know, alchemy is an ancient science that was handed down at least as far back as Egypt. India also had its own form of alchemy. Ancient India and ancient China also had its own form of alchemy. Alchemy is known today to be something that crazed men did to try to change lead into gold, but that's really just a cover story. The real story of alchemy is that it's a science. It's a holistic science that looks at nature and tries to understand what is going on in nature. It doesn't try to break things down. It tries to bring things together. It's kind of the opposite of science. I like to think of alchemy as alchemy today as sort of where science is going. In shedding its ancient mystic origins, alchemy seems to be the only science that is bringing all of the disparate elements of science together. Fulcanelli, who wrote a book called Mystery of the Cathedrals in 1926, appears to be the last of a secret society, I guess. He repeats over and over in his book, Mystery of the Cathedrals, that he's nearly breaking his sacred vows by telling the reader the information. And so we can assume from this that Fulcanelli is a member of a group, of ancient order that is preserving the knowledge in certain ways. One of the ways that they preserve knowledge is through monuments like Notre Dame Cathedral or the Great Pyramids even are really alchemical monuments. And so he wrote this book as kind of what I call the message in a bottle. He threw it out into the ocean and hoped that someone would eventually recover the message, decipher it, and figure out what he was saying. For some reason, no one really was interested in deciphering the message. They were more interested in who Fulcanelli was. Since he was anonymous, this created an intrigue, and many people went after that mystery. I was not all that interested in his anonymity. I was more interested in what it was he was saying. And for some reason, Vincent and I appear to be the only two people who really were interested in what Fulcanelli was trying to say. So in its own way, our two books are really the only analysis of Mystery of the Cathedrals and its intrinsic meaning, and there's very little concern in the books about who Fulcanelli was. So Fulcanelli was a very, very, very smart man who knew far more about this world than it seems possible at the time that he wrote the book. 75 years ago, 80 years ago now. So, in the end, Fulcanelli is telling us that this science that once existed everywhere is far more profound and advanced than our modern science is. And that was intriguing, and so I began trying to understand what alchemy really was as opposed to what the mythology was saying. And I think that's where all of the work that I do stems from, is that trying to understand what alchemy is and what is the message that Fulcanelli is trying to tell us.
Very good. In 1957, the second edition of Fulcanelli's The Mystery of the Cathedrals was published. Strangely, it contained a new chapter not present in the original 1926 edition. It described an enigmatic cross in Hendaye, France that remained unsolved, and I believe its message lost to history unless and then perhaps you and your writing partner, Vincent, come along and devote your life to solving it. Tell us about the cross at Hendaye, Jay.
Yeah, the cross of Hendaye really is the most intriguing thing that I've ever come across. No one knows who built it. It's at least 350 years old. It sits in a churchyard in a little small town in Hendaye, France, which is on the border with Spain. Louis XIV was married at Hendaye. Hitler visited the cross in 1940. Many strange people passed their way through Hendaye on their way to the alchemical schools of Spain, say in the 1200s and the 1100s. So Hendaye became a town, kind of a passageway, and someone built this cross, and we don't know who it was, in the churchyard. It was originally in the grave in the cemetery. It was moved to the churchyard in about 1830 or so, and it sits there, enigmatic, obscure. No one seemed to ever have paid much attention to it until Fulcanelli decided to give a look at it. He wrote his chapter on the Cross of Hendaye. Since Fulcanelli supposedly disappeared from this world around 1929, this chapter must have laid somewhere, waiting to be published. We're not exactly sure where it was or where it came from. There are indications that people like Schwaller de Lubitsch did know about the Cross of Hendaye prior to the publication in 1957, but we're not sure about that. So pretty much no one, except for a couple esoteric scientists, paid attention to the Cross of Hendaye, and since no one had really looked at it, and since if I could prove that what Fulcanelli was saying about the Cross of Hendaye was true, then I would be able to say with some degree of certainty that the other things that Fulcanelli is saying in the book, Mystery of the Cathedrals, was true. So since this extra chapter had been added, I believe that Fulcanelli inserted the chapter on purpose to try to alert us. And while the chapter, it would have been had great credibility in the 1926 edition, the fact that it was added to the republished edition some 30 years later really is mysterious. And since Canciale, his editor, never really brings up the fact that there's an additional chapter, this is even more curious. So inside this chapter is this discussion of this strange cross, and this strange cross is quite remarkable. As Fulcanelli says, the maker of the cross had profound scientific knowledge about our universe. Well, how does a guy 350 years ago, before advanced telescopes and things, how do they know what's really going on in the world around us without the technology that you would think you would need? And I guess that's where alchemy comes in. But either way, what the cross is saying is that world is, that this age is coming to an end. And this age is coming to an end according to the time given on the cross right now. Between 1992 and 2012, something is going to happen. A lot of people speculate that it's a gate or is going to open, or time itself is going to end, that this gate, when it opens, ends time. Kubrick in 2001 seems to understand this alchemical knowledge, and it's also telling us that there's a kind of a gate that's going to open or close. Anyway, we're not really sure because the knowledge has been obscured so much by history that we can only speculate, and unfortunately that's all we can do because we just don't know exactly what is going to happen. However, there would be a compression of events leading up to this, I would think, and I see the world right now and I say there really is a compression of events, and that each year there seems to be more events happening that seem to be more out of control. And so Fulcanelli indicates that the chaos will be the determinate factor at the end of this age, and it looks like we are indeed falling into chaos. However, this is not to say that we are ending or that the world is ending. I want everyone to understand the Cross of Hendaye is merely saying that this age is going to end, and that whatever has preceded this ending, the thing that follows after the end will be nothing like what has happened before. So history, to me, is sort of an initiatory process leading the human race to this moment that we are all going to share. And it's going to happen, it is happening now. It's a stretched out moment. It's a 20-year stretched out moment where people like you, William, and Whitley Strieber and me and many others are suddenly beginning to understand things about this world that we never understood before. And we can all, polish our fingernails and say, hey, we must be geniuses. But I'm wondering if maybe the knowledge is only now becoming available, and that's why we're discovering it.
Oh, I totally agree with that, Jay, and especially when you watch your DVD, The Secrets of Alchemy, you see how that force of synchronicity runs throughout your life's work. People, facts, places, maps just seem to show up. Talk about what that means to you. How did you tap into that force of synchronicity, and what does it mean to you?
Well, it's a great question. One of my favorite writers is a obscure French traditionalist named René Grenon, and René Grenon says that while the initiatory schools may be gone, may have died out for the most part, it is still possible through events and through synchronicities for a person to become initiated. And I think that's what we're seeing all around us, especially within the people that are interested in these things and the people that are listening to this radio show. The teachers are gone Fulcanelli probably was one of the last teachers of alchemy, and all we have is his book. But through strange synchronicities, some people seem to be able to leap into this initiatory stream, and I think at the end of time that is the process. And so when I started out on this journey, I didn't believe in alchemy. I didn't really know what it was. I didn't believe in cosmic events that could affect me as a person. But here I stand, almost 20 years later, and I can guarantee that they're true. And I can guarantee that there are people who are more advanced than we are that share our planet with us, and they're very discreet people. And there are also larger dimensional schemes that seem to play into the hands of an earnest, curious person. One of my late good friends, Terence McKenna, once said, nature loves courage and goes out of her way to make the road easier for the courageous. And I think that's really true. I think that if you have the courage to go forth, strange everyday miracles begin happening. People begin helping you that you never would have thought would help you. Events happen. Books appear. All sorts of things happen, and I know they've happened to you, and I know they've happened to many other people. And these things begin to accumulate after a while, and the cumulative effect is just kind of, wow, how could this be? How can all these things be happening to me and to all the other people that are involved in this kind of work? And that are overarching forces that are at work, that are literally helping us. Like, I don't know how to describe it. I don't want to go too far with this because I might scare some people away, but there are higher forces that are literally helping the chess pieces move around on the board, so to speak.
Jay's book and DVD are available at the unknowncountry.com bookstore. And be sure and visit his website, sacredmysteries.com. It's full of great stuff, wonderful articles about Stanley Kubrick, about the coming luminous being, the new Homo luminous. Jay, let's talk about that spiritual evolutionary leap just for a moment. That seems to be one of the profound threads that you've been weaving together. Paint us a picture, if you will, from your study of Fulcanelli and the Cross of Hendaye, of what may be possible at this time, spiritually speaking.
Well, as I wandered through this work, trying to bring all the disparate ends together, I began realizing that alchemy was really saying that they didn't want to turn the material of lead into the material of gold, although that may very well be possible. But they're really talking about is some strange process that takes the lead of the human body and turns it into light. Now, this was extremely intriguing, and I began studying it. And through my work, I met several people from all sorts of different cultures. Alberto Villoldo of the Inca shaman, and John Major Jenkins' study of the Mayan calendar, and a lot of other people. And I began realizing that these cultures were all predicting that some kind of being was emerging out of man. This brought me back to study some of the earlier Christian texts, and I began realizing that Jesus himself was saying that he was the Son of Man, not quite understanding what this meant and why Jesus, who is telling us that he's the Son of God, why he would also tell us that he's the Son of Man. And I began realizing, of course, that this is how he would describe a being that would emerge out of man. It would be the Son of Man. It would be a being that comes from man. Just as Cro-Magnon came from Homo sapien came from Homo erectus, so too does Homo luminous come from Homo sapien. And Homo luminous is what the Peruvian shamans say is going on, that our race is going to disappear from this planet and be replaced by a new race of beings, and that this is happening right now, and that there are people walking among us right now who are of this new race, and they have certain peculiar powers of healing and powers of psychic powers and things. Don't know if I've ever met a Homo luminous, although I've met people who strike me as being extremely bright, not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. And they seem to be more advanced than the people that are around them. I think a lot of people today are suffering through a lot of frustration because it seems that most of the people around them, many of the people around them, are not as smart as they are, or not as aware as they are, especially probably a lot of people listening to this radio show. And I think that we have to be aware that that there's something other than what we think is going on underneath the surface right now, and that all of history is actually possibly the alchemical experiment of changing lead into gold, and that experiment is about to come to its culmination. And in that moment, 2012 appears to be the time when the experiment comes to an end. I believe that a new being will appear on our planet, and it will be Homo luminous, as the Peruvian shaman and the Egyptians also say. They say that when we return back to the Zep Tepi, or the first time, that a new creature will come, a new man, a new being. And I think that's what's going on. I think that, in effect, that we are an intermediate species.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Jay. I wrote a book called Cloak of the Illuminati. In this book, I described or reported on a government report from 2002 put together on converging technologies. The government gathered a couple hundred top scientists together, and they put together this report that recommended a PR campaign to get Americans used to the idea that 4 primary technologies, genes, bits, neurons, and nanotechnology, are converging into one. And I had put out the idea that these may well be the same 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water retooled in a new form and fashion. And what we're seeing is, for example, at MIT, is that those 4 technologies are converging in the development of a second skin for humanity. How would you comment on a development such as that in connection with this idea of the Homo luminous?
Well, that's incredibly fascinating. I hadn't read that, but I would like to very much. I think that what goes on the physical level with human beings is a reflection of what is going on a higher dimensional or a hyperdimensional level. And so when we're busy creating alchemy such as you're describing, it's a reflection of a higher alchemy that's going on. And we can feel that there's something else going on, and that is inexpressible and ineffable. And we reflect it back, and I think that's what Stanley Kubrick was doing in 2001 and J.R.R. Tolkien is doing in Lord of the Rings, and I think that's what these scientists are doing. They are creating the new species, I would bet, but they don't really understand exactly what they're doing. But through synchronicities and cumulative events, I think that they are playing a hand in creating this new species by combining all of these elements. This is, the most wondrous and the most dangerous of times, and to even hear that a report like the one you just described is almost mind-blowing on its own, let alone trying to determine where they're going to be going with this. At this point, no one knows where the ship is headed. We can only assume that we're not going to be dashed upon the rocks I don't think we are. I'm a quite hopeful person, and I think that these scientists are directing us towards this end of history, end of maybe even the end of Homo sapien. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to wax, in a dark place here. I'm just trying to say that just because one thing ends doesn't mean that another thing isn't going to begin. And these guys that you're talking about at MIT and these nanotechnology people, they're planting seeds for a future of which none of us can describe. And that just increases the jeopardy and the wondrousness of what is really happening.
Right. Once again, Jay's DVD, The Secrets of Alchemy, is available at the unknowncountry.com store. Get it now and be a part of this mystery. Become aware of this and tap the stream of illumination that Jay is presenting to us. Jay, I wanted to ask you about the work of Lawrence Gardner. Are you familiar with Lawrence Gardner?
Oh, yeah. Yes, I am.
Okay. In The Mystery of the Cathedrals, Falconelli says the 4 ages of the circle on the Cross of Hendaye is equivalent to the sacred cow of Hindu mythology. And this sacred cow is therefore a symbol of alchemy. Interestingly, Lawrence notes that when the Israelites burned the golden calf, it turned to powder, which they drank with water. And Lawrence says this refers to a profound alchemical substance, the white powder of projection, that's composed of iridium, rhodium, and other elements, and that this white powder fed the light bodies of the pharaohs. Can we connect the mysteries of the Cross of Hendaye to Lawrence's white powder gold, which he identifies as the Philosopher's Stone?
Wow. Now, that's what they call a loaded question. I'm going to say this, and I don't want to go any further because it's going to be part of my next work. I'm working.
I have a really bad habit of asking people questions about their next book.
No, that's good.
Okay.
It's good to anticipate it. I will say this, to any earnest seeker, to any curious observer, I can guarantee this. The Cross of Hendaye, besides being an astronomical and historical marker and an incredible teacher about symbols and symbology, the icons on the Cross of Hendaye also are teaching you how to create the Philosopher's Stone or the white gold.
They teach us how to create the Philosopher's Stone.
Absolutely. It teaches, once you crack, what I cracked was the original, what I call the exoteric meaning of the Cross of Hendaye, which is the end of time and what Falconelli is talking about. But it's also talking about how to create the Philosopher's Stone, how to successfully create the Philosopher's Stone. And by the way, it's no accident that all of this white gold talk that's been going on for about 10 years now is happening now. It's happening now because this, one of the most important facets of the work of alchemy is, yes, knowing how to do your experiment is very important, but one of the most important things is when to do your experiment. And what the Cross of Hendaye's exoteric meaning is telling us is when to do the experiments. But what the experiment is also on the Cross of Hendaye, and that'll be in my next video or my next book, I haven't decided. And it's absolutely jaw-dropping. And yes, I think that Lawrence has cracked the symbol of the story of the calf in Israel. I really do. And I also like the whole idea of the 4 ages or the 4 legs of the calf. The whole entire calf has to fall apart into powder before the alchemy is fully realized. And that's a great description for what's going on now. The 4th leg of the calf has been kicked out in the Iron Age, and the calf is literally crumbling. And out of the crumbling are the seeds and the germination of the next age, which is going to be an alchemical age. And yes, you're right. I mean, all these things are right. The iridium and the rhodium and all of these things are what contributes to making a light body. However, you only need to take the substances while you're in history. When history is at an end, all of us will be fully realized. So what I'm saying is that taking the white powder is something you have to do during the throes of the Iron Age, to find the illumination. But you only need that in this age. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does.
Yeah, after this age is over, in 2012 or later, whenever the Cross of Hendaye, the exact time says, when this age is over, you will no longer need to perform the experiments because the things that are there will be readily available to everyone.
Right. In other words, I'm really glad you brought up the idea of stargates and wormholes too earlier, Jay, because that ultimately is the ultimate expression, according to Lawrence, of this white powder projection. NASA is looking into it. Various physics labs around the world are looking into this. Do you feel that we're on the verge now of? Do you feel like we're in an age now of being able to use these magical substances for enlightenment and for the advancement of our species?
Well, I do. One of my side things I've done in my life is I've examined the history of shamanic substances and psychedelics, and there's very many strange things about the distribution of some of these things early on, say in the 1960s, and almost appears to have been regulated and controlled by somebody. And I say that someone was softening us up, especially our generation, was softening us up so that we would be able to navigate the realms that were going to be needed to be navigated at the proper time. Whereas psychedelics are profane and don't really help us. What they do is they get you familiar with a hyperdimensional landscape so that when you actually do make the hyperdimensional leap, you're not confused, you're not as dismayed by what you discover, and you can navigate those realms more easily. And I think that is, in fact, most of what's been going on for the past 30 or 40 years is many researchers are drawing maps, and they don't know what these maps really are. But these maps are the maps that we all need to study and know in order to navigate the realms of the world we're about to enter. So yes, I think that these substances have a way of bending molecules so that they become transdimensional or hyperdimensional, and literally the molecule itself gains so little resistance that it's able to pass through the wormhole. And if the molecule has consciousness and it's in mass like a human, then what will happen is essentially a quantum leap in information delivered to the human. And the human will come back, presumably, pass the information along, or everyone will go at once and have the information themselves. I don't know what's going to happen. But yes, these things are extremely important. They are part of the alchemical truth, but at the same time, I must warn everyone, they are also extremely dangerous. Not only are they toxic, but if you don't know what you're doing, they can cause severe psychological problems. So you have to know what you're doing. You have to study history. You have to study science of the spirit and regular materialist science. And I think you need to prepare yourself before any of these things are done, and you need to prepare yourself, we all do, for the opening of the time gate, which is really opening right now. It's just not open very far.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment, Jay. One of the amazing concepts that you talk about in detail in Secrets of Alchemy is this idea that about every 13,000 years or so our galaxy splits a plume of cosmic ray particles that wash over the Earth, and that this time the northern hemisphere, including America, is going to be bathed in a fire the alchemists called Inri and the Christians call Christ. This fire will cause either a catastrophic end to our civilization as we know it, or will trigger the spontaneous evolution of our species. Let's talk about that for a moment, Jay.
Yeah, that's what the Cross of Hendaye is saying, that there's this strange thing that happens on Earth every 13,000 years, every 26,000 years. And interestingly enough, you can actually see species decline and species development falling just about on these cusps. I believe that the zodiac was a clock designed, and I show this in the video, designed to show us how this 13,000, 26,000 year cycle works. And I believe that while it's hooked to a thing that is called the precession of the equinoxes, I think that the precession of the equinoxes themselves are more important than we realize. So every 13,000 years, a burst of a cloud of alchemical substances envelops our solar system. It falls down onto the sun and bakes these chemicals. And then the sun blows these chemicals out, these transmuted chemicals baked in the atomic fires of the sun. The planet itself, according to the work of Dr. Paula Violette, has coatings of this iridium, rhodium layers every 13,000 years. And what I believe this is saying, I'll try to say this as clearly as I can. What I believe happens is that when the galaxy periodically blows off some of the accumulated debris in an explosion, this explosion is first seen by us on Earth. It could be thousands of years later, though, before the dust comes, because light travels much faster than particles. So the particles are not going to come as fast. So it could be thousands of years later that the dust particles appear. In other words, the galaxy could have already exploded thousands of years ago and have passed from our view now. But the dust cloud could be just arriving now. And there's some evidence to prove that. Global warming, the trouble that the sun has been having lately with solar flaring, also global dimming. There appears to be dust in the air, more dust than there used to be. And all of these things could be a precursor to this cloud of alchemical particles that are coming down. These particles will come down, and for some people, they're going to be a disaster. And for other people, they're going to be a revelation. This is the problem. Alchemy is replete with stories of people who have taken the alchemical substances and have either died or gone insane. So I think that what the Christians call the Day of Judgment is really the separating out between the people who can handle the sudden inflection of hyperdimensional states that will exist, that are already beginning to manifest here on Earth with UFOs and aliens and many of the other things. This is the gate that's opening. But when that gate is blown wide open, almost anything will be possible at that point. And we're very, very close to it.
Right. I've been kind of tracking this in various traditions. The Mayans... This is William Henry. This is Dreamland. We'll be right back.
Hello?
Jay, I've been tracking this whole concept of these emanations from the galactic center. One of the Mayan terms for it is its. They call that the blessed magical substance, the liquid rain of heaven. Flip over to the Israelites, and they talk about this substance they call mufkit. That means, literally translated, mufkit means, what is it? And we keep seeing this idea of a substance raining from the heavens. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about. And I wonder, in connection with this, if you've kept up with some of the research that's been presented lately by our good friend Richard C. Hoagland and David Wilcock. And they're presenting research from Russian scientists that say that all of the planets in our solar system, every one of them, is presently showing signs of energetic increase and, in fact, brightening. And what they're citing is this Russian research that says that our sun and solar system is entering into a zone or a field of the Milky Way that aligns with the New Age concept of the photon belt. What's your comments on that type of research?
Well, Richard's an old friend of mine, and I appreciate his work. In fact, a lot of his work is frankly based on my work, and that's fine, and we're all helping each other. And I think that he's right. I think something, there was a great short story once by a novelist, a science fiction novelist named Poul Anderson, called Brainstorm. And this is written about 1955. And in Brainstorm, that is exactly what happens. The quadrant that we're in moves out of a section of the Milky Way where everything is murky in the previous section, but when we move out of it, suddenly things are not murky anymore. IQs triple and quadruple. Animals like pigs and cats are suddenly smart enough to figure out high technology, and it's a quite amazing novel. And I think that that's what's going on here. I really do. I think we're moving out of a grind of history, and we're taking our true place in what we really are. And we had to go through what we've just been going through for the last 6,000, 7,000 years to get to where we are today. I think that we are moving towards something where the whole entire quadrant of where we are in the galaxy, we appear to be moving out of it and moving into another place. And I think that another thing that's very interesting about these things is the angle at which the particles hit us, believe it or not, has a lot to do with how they affect us. It's not just the particles themselves, but it's the molecular angle that the particles have. And so we can actually be passing through a stream of particles and not really having them affect us much. And then we can kind of turn, and suddenly we're flowing into the particles like going into a headwind. And then the particles fly all over us. And I think that's what we're doing. We're like a giant ship, and we're turning into the headwind now. And we'll be completely into the headwind of this thing at 2012. And I think that's when you'll see a lot of, I think you'll literally see an increase in rhodium and iridium on the surface of the Earth. I think you're going to see I think it's actually already starting, but I think you will see it increase more and more. Even though these are particles that you can hardly see, you would need a scientist to find them. And that is working hand in hand with the rest of the alchemy to create the end of time.
Jay's DVD, The Secrets of Alchemy, The Great Cross and the End of Time, is available now from the unknowncountry.com store. Get the DVD, watch it. What Jay is offering is a tool to help you navigate these times, to put yourself in the position to be able to participate in this dramatic change that's unfolding right before our very eyes. Jay, I want to talk just for a moment about some recent research that the cell phone industry is conducting. They're studying the calcite microclusters on the pineal gland, and now we're actually describing our pineal gland as a wireless transmitter capable of receiving even faint messages through resonance. They think the pineal is a natural wireless transmitter. How might this research play in what you're describing in terms of these new particles that we're streaming into?
Well, I'd like to see that report. Yeah, well, let's see here. Another question like this. Okay, the pineal gland is a transmitter. As you probably know, there's a zirconium diamond inside your pineal gland. All animals have pineal glands. And just like a radio needs a diamond, so do we need this diamond inside us. And this is how birds navigate, of course, know how to go south and north. It's because of their pineal gland. And the pineal gland, of course, Descartes said it was the seat of the soul, and it is the seat of the soul. The human beings have, of course, one of the largest pineal glands. We have one of the largest brains, so naturally we'd have one of the largest pineal glands of any animal. Furthermore, because human beings walk upright, remember what I said about standing into the stream, the flow of it, or your angle being very important. Because human beings stand upright, the vertical axis of their body creates takes away the obfuscation that is involved in the transmission, so that a highly attuned pineal gland sitting upright in a yoga pose or just standing upright and being quiet will actually receive information. This is what alchemy is really all about. Interestingly enough, many of the shamanic substances are made of tryptamines, and tryptamines are very, very, very close to molecularly to the extracts that come from the pineal gland, serotonin and melatonin. What I believe, and I'm going way out on a limb here, what I believe alchemy is the ability to take serotonin and melatonin, the substances produced by the pineal gland, and create a feedback mechanism that pushes the serotonin and melatonin substances back into your own pineal gland, causing this feedback causes a super serotonin, I believe, to occur. And this super serotonin is the path to illumination. It is the wire that the transmission of information is carried along. And so the two things that the Philosopher's Stone promises is total illumination and extended life. Interestingly enough, serotonin is very close to tryptamines, and I believe is the vehicle for the illumination, and melatonin, and conversely you will create a super melatonin in these alchemical experiments. The super melatonin is well known by scientists to stop and abort the aging process. Interestingly enough, they did experiments at Harvard where they took the pineal glands out of older rats and put pineal glands from younger rats into the place of the older pineal glands, and the rats began reversing their aging process. This is in the book The Melatonin Miracle, well published, well known, 15-year-old research. Again, when you take these super serotonin, super melatonin byproducts of brain chemistry and create this feedback loop, you will reverse the aging process. This is what Ayurvedic medicine is about. The Sufis are also practicing this. Almost all of the real traditions that are left on Earth or have been on Earth know about what I'm saying, and I'm sure some people are listening right now know what I'm saying. And this really is the essence of alchemy. This is what the powder, the white powder, tries to do, or it does, but what I'm saying is that the human pineal gland produces this substance all on its own and needs no outside help at all. So that's what I said, that you need to take the white gold during this age, the Iron Age or the Kali Yuga, and you don't need to take it when you're out of this age. because when the ship drifts into the full wind, we receive the full tilt boogie of this thing, and that's what's going on right now. And that's why people like you and me and our listeners, we couldn't even have had this conversation 20 years ago. And now we are. And that's amazing.
Oh, yeah, I know. I thank my lucky stars to be alive at this time, to be a part of this whole group consciousness that's developing. You seem to operate, as do I, that the human body is a plant that's capable of manufacturing secretions that bring about enlightenment. Do you feel that this may be why the secretions and excretions of our body are so tightly regulated? Do you feel that there are forces that want to keep us from releasing these secrets that are within us?
Absolutely. I think we're not ready for that. Fulcanelli says that the secret protects itself, and don't forget the first part of secretion is secret. Right. And that is really true. You can't really tell someone something that they don't understand. In other words, if we found a hunter-gatherer from New Guinea and we tried to explain the inner workings of an automobile engine, it would be pretty much a useless discussion. So the secret protects itself, and the alchemists believe that the human being is the paragon of creation. When the alchemists and the mystics say that the earth is in the center of the universe, they don't mean that it's physically in the center of the universe. They mean that because man is here, we are extremely important. In other words, so important that we may very well be the center of the universe. And because of the peculiar nature of man and his physique, he is caught between two dimensions. Our minds, our spirits are of a higher dimension while our bodies are trapped here in the third dimension. But this is not an accident because it's extremely necessary for us to have a human body to be able to foment these particular chemistries and secretions that only we have the ability to do. And these secretions, interestingly enough, are formed by consciousness and thought. They've done many experiments and proven that many of the secretions that come from the endocrine glands, especially the pineal, are driven by thought. In other words, someone is depressed, their pineal gland immediately begins shutting down. It no longer does the serotonin, melatonin flows begin happening. But as soon as a person pulls out of their depression or becomes happy, suddenly you see that the secretions increase. So these secretions also are the captains of the immune system. They roam through the entire endocrine, and these rule our organs and everything. So when the pineal changes, everything underneath it changes. And so the goal of alchemy is to change the pineal. A really good book by this is The Spirit Molecule.
Dr. Rick Strassman, yes.
Yeah, very good book on this about whereas dimethyltryptamine is a profane substance, you must remember that there's only 2 atoms difference between dimethyltryptamine, the most powerful psychedelic ever known, and serotonin, which your brain produces. So what does this mean? It means that serotonin is the pathway towards higher dimensional states. It's very important to understand that.
Definitely. I want to get back just for a moment to the Cross of Hendaye and the way that it points to Peru as a possible refuge of the apocalypse. And some of the time left, Jay, let's talk about that. And what are your thoughts and feelings on the possibility that there was an advanced civilization that was destroyed by a cataclysm, perhaps a cataclysm that derived ultimately from the expulsion of particles from the galactic center, and this civilization went underground? What's your latest thinking on that idea?
Well, again, I want to get back to this concept, of this abstract concept about how the ship has to be, turning the ship into the full wind. Okay, the northern hemisphere now is going to be tilted towards the full wind, and so it's going to be hit extremely hard. So Fulcanelli naturally says that, at this time you should go to the southern hemisphere, and the Cross of Hendaye picks Peru and the caves there. When I went to Peru and I investigated the cave system that is extremely extensive and runs underneath the entire Andes Mountains, there's literally thousands and thousands of cave entrances. I realized that this thing every 13,000 years does a leap. So 13,000 years ago, it hit the southern hemisphere, not the northern hemisphere. And the people there had to escape from it, and they went into these caves that either made at the time or had been made earlier by a more advanced civilization. And I also believe, by the way, that Tibet, which has also these same rumors of underground caverns and systems, is also a place of refuge. But the Cross of Hendaye really points out at Peru, and that's because the Northern Hemisphere is going to take the brunt of the hit this time. It doesn't mean that the whole Northern Hemisphere is going to be consumed and everyone's going to die. Fulcanelli says that it's going to be tried by fire. If you understand that fire really is these alchemical substances, then you understand that some of us are going to be all right, and some of us aren't. So he is saying that maybe it would be better for a lot of people to get out of the hit that's coming, go south, and then come back up, is what I believe, and then come back north after the storm is over. And that storm, I believe, will be over around 2013 or so. And that's what he's saying. And so Peru is a place of refuge to get away from dramatic climactic changes that I think are about to happen, and many, many other things. As the human race reaches the end of its gigantic initiation in 2012, many people are not going to make it, and a lot of other people are not going to be very happy about having their world torn asunder. And so there's going to be a lot of madness and anger, as there already is. For the rest of us who don't really care about the material world and are more concerned with the spiritual world, we just have to take a deep breath, know that everything is going to happen the way we want it to, and if you want to go to Peru, to Cusco, it would probably be a safe place. I think what Fulcanelli and the Cross of Hendaye are really trying to do is trying to get a lot of the same types of people into one place, not necessarily to escape the catastrophe, although it may very well be, but because there's strength in numbers and the passing of information is much easier when you have a community. I think that the Cross of Hendaye is attempting to create an alchemical community in Cusco.
Wow, that is incredible. Now, presumably this is going to be an advanced spiritual group?
Pardon?
Jay, what would you feel would be a balanced spiritual approach to these times?
That's a good question. I would say that right now everyone needs to become extremely tolerant of everyone else. I think we all need to meditate. I think we all need to study history, study science, read William Henry's books, read The Cross of Hendaye, see the DVD, Secrets of Alchemy, listen to this radio show, and a little praying doesn't hurt either. The higher forces respond to prayer, and I highly recommend it.
Jay's DVD, The Secrets of Alchemy, is available now from the UnknownCountry.com store. Get this DVD. Watch it. Watch it with your friends. Share it with your family, because what Jay is offering is a clue to help us navigate these times, to move forward. Jay, it's been a total pleasure talking with you, and I hope we'll be able to get together here on Dreamland again soon.
I hope so too. Thanks, William.
Thank you, Jay. This is William Henry. I'll see you next week on Dreamland.
One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and writer, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Tonight she has a remarkable report for us on a very old but very important story. The UFO crashes in New Mexico way back in 1947. Here she is with something very new from Philadelphia, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. You know, if it's true, that name Roswell has become synonymous with UFOs through television shows such as The Real X-Files, about a ruthless government plot to cover up crashed disks, non-human entities, and their possible alien agendas to preserve the public status quo and prevent panic. Confusion and conspiracy theories began in early July 1947 when American newspapers headlined in big, bold type that one of the flying discs that people all over the country were claiming to see had crashed on a ranch in New Mexico. That's the famous Foster Ranch between Corona and Roswell, where rancher Mac Brazel found silver debris scattered over a wide area just before the 4th of July. Mac went to the Roswell sheriff and reported his discovery. That led to military intelligence officers at the Roswell Army Airfield going to the ranch to collect all the debris that they could find. Soon, General Roger Ramey posed in a photograph with a torn silver weather balloon and told the press there was no crashed disc, only the tattered weather balloon that laid on the floor. But with us in dreamland now is a man who personally knew Mac Brazel's two sons. His name is Chuck Wade, owner of Wade Building Company in Gallup, New Mexico. Mr. Wade received his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from New Mexico State University. Chuck was born and raised in Corona, New Mexico. In 1947, he was 7 years old, and his father, Jesse Wade, owned the only bar in Corona. And that's where Mac Brazel first went after finding the strange silver debris.
And in 1935, Dad was going through Corona, stopped in at the bar, and before the night was over, he was the owner of that bar. He and my mother ran that bar for 42 years, retiring in 1976. And that's where my dad was the morning during the summer of 1947, when Mac Brazel drove up in an old pickup truck, came up to my dad, and wanted Dad to go out to the Foster Ranch to see what in the world had crashed out there. And he was very, very insistent Dad go out there because there's stuff that he had never seen before. But Dad was even more insistent and did not go. So my father suggested Mac report this to Roswell because that was the closest military base and also the closest to him, the closest law enforcement. After Mac left the bar, he must have gone up to the Du Bois drugstore, because I've heard Geraldine Du Bois tell me twice in the last 3 years that Mac made a phone call to Roswell telling them, and I don't know who them are, about something crashing out on his ranch.
What happened next in terms of your knowledge?
My personal knowledge was I'd heard my dad speak to his customers about this over the years. But then in 1980, the book The Roswell Incident came out by Charles Berlitz and William Moore, and researched by Mr. Stanton Friedman. I read this book about 1981. I'm pretty sure it's 1981. And in this book, there is a picture of Mr. Bill Brazel on page 81, and there's a caption under this picture on page 81 that says, Bill Brazel, son of rancher W.W. Brazel, that was then Mac. Bill's collection of the dig fragments was confiscated by the Air Force in 1949 after Bill had said too much the evening before in a tavern in Corona, New Mexico. That would have had to have been my dad's bar because there's only one. Whenever I read this, I called up Bill Brazel, who lived in Capitan, and I've known Bill basically all my life. And I talked to him. We chit-chatted for a while. He was asking how my mother was doing, because my father had passed away 2 years prior to this. And then I asked Bill about the book, The Roswell Incident, and may I read you this caption? And he said, okay, so I did what I just read you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked point blank, Bill, is this true? And he said yes. That was 1981 until today. I am on a quest to find out what my father did not see on the Foster Ranch, the summer of 1947.
Chuck, what was it in that book that was detailed about what Bill dug up out there in the Mac Brazel Ranch?
He was asked the question what he had found out there, and so Bill said, yes, I can describe it. There were several different types of stuff. Of course, all I had was small bits and pieces. The one thing that I can say about it was sure light. It weighed almost nothing. There were some wood-like particles I picked up. They were like balsa wood in weight, but a bit darker in color and much harder. You know, the thing about the wood is that the older it gets, the harder it gets.
Mm-hmm.
And you couldn't scratch this wood, and it wouldn't break. It was just, and all he had was a few splinters.
Mm-hmm.
He says that he never tried to burn it, and I think that's important.
Okay.
And then there were several bits of metal-like substance, something like on the order of tin foil, except the stuff wouldn't tear. And that's basically what he says here that he was talking about whenever he said fragments, disc fragments.
And you are reading from, give the title and the authors and the copyright year again.
Yes, it's The Roswell Incident by Charles Berlitz and William L. Moore, researched by Mr. Stanton Friedman. And then he also had some thread-like material, and it looks like silk, but he certainly didn't know what it was, but it wasn't a sewing thread. Also, I'd like to discuss a conversation my mother and I had with Loretta Proctor.
Mm-hmm.
Mother and Loretta were lifelong friends. They had went to school together. And a couple years before my mother passed away, she passed away in 1989. In 1987, Mother and I went out to visit Loretta Proctor. Floyd, her husband, had passed away several years prior. So Loretta told Mother and I about the day that Mac Brazel came to their house with some parts and pieces that he didn't know what they were. And Max showed Floyd these pieces and her. One of them looked like a piece of balsa wood. It was not very heavy, but Floyd always carried a very sharp knife because he worked with sheep, and you need a sharp knife to work with sheep. And Floyd took out his knife, and he could not cut that balsa wood, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
nor would it scratch. It was just tough. Then Floyd took out some of the kitchen match, because he smoked and he always had these big old matches, and it wouldn't burn. And Loretta told Mother and I that to our face.
That's important testimony, and it reinforces what others have said that they heard from Mac Brazel and others about this strange material that was so light and wouldn't bend and wouldn't scratch.
Yes.
So the only real fact that you got from Bill Brazel was that he had dug up material at the Corona crash that was supposed to be a silver disc of some sort or a silver craft of some sort, and that he talked about that debris that he had at your father's bar. What did Bill Brazel say happened to his materials?
He said that he did not have it because one night about 2 years before, after Dad's incident, that would be the crash or the finding of the debris out on the Foster Ranch, I went into Corona for the evening. While I was there, I guess I talked too much, more than I should have. I know I mentioned having this collection to someone. Anyway, the next day, a staff car came out to the ranch from Roswell with a captain and 3 enlisted men in it. Dad was away at the time, but it turned out that they didn't want him anyway. They wanted me. Seems the captain, Armstrong, I think his name was, Captain Armstrong had heard about my collection and asked to see it. Of course I showed it to him, and he said that the stuff was important to the country's security, and that it was most important that I let him have it to take back with him. He seemed most interested in the string-like stuff than any of the rest of it. I don't know what else to do, so I agreed. Next, he wanted me to take them out to the pasture where I had found this stuff, and he did.
Wouldn't it be wonderful to know where all of this material is that our government has collected from these disc crash sites over the years?
Oh, my goodness, yes. But part of it wound up in the Pentagon with Colonel Corso and the 3-star General Trudeau.
That's right.
And that's out of the book, The Roswell Incident.
That's out of The Day After Roswell by Lieutenant...
I used the wrong word. Yes, The Day After Roswell by Colonel Philip Corso.
Right. Now, so this is fascinating that you had firsthand experience as a child and growing up in Corona through your father, the bar, knowing Bill and Vernon Brazel. And now we are in 2004, and you went out on a very interesting dig yourself this summer of 2004, but it was in a different place. Can you explain where you went and why?
Do you want me to start back with...
Yes.
Okay. About this time last year, November of 2003, there was a conference in Henderson, Nevada called UFO Crash and Retrieval Conference. I went to that along with my brother Bobby. And one of the presenters there at the conference was a Mr. Art Campbell from the state of Oregon. And he gave a nice presentation about having located the UFO crash and the plains of San Augustine. I'm sure that he did not say that it was a UFO crash there, but since then I feel confident that that's what it is. Mm-hmm. But anyway, he gave a nice presentation about some artifacts that he found there on the plains of San Augustine that are most unusual. And I really wanted to meet Mr. Campbell after the conference or during the conference, but I just didn't make the effort. Then in March of 2004, Mr. Campbell was a presenter at the UFO symposium at Aztec, New Mexico. And he also presented about these items that he had retrieved from the plains of San Augustine. Well, I had lots of time in Aztec, so I made a point to visit with Mr. Campbell, and he and I hit it off right off the bat. Really nice.
Can you explain for listeners exactly what it is that Art Campbell has that he thinks are artifacts of an extraterrestrial biological entity and craft?
One thing, there is a sole of a shoe that is most unusual. This shoe sole is 4 7/8 inches long. It's 1 1/8 inches wide at the narrow part, and it's made out of 9 layers of material. And I've held this shoe in my hand, and it's really cute. The shoe sole is really cute. And Mr. Campbell had this analyzed at a laboratory that is the same lab that analyzed the Shroud of Turin. Mm-hmm. And it's most unusual.
Is it shaped like a human foot or something else?
No, it's shaped the same, but I have a cutout of a child's size 4 shoe sole, and then this one superimposed over it, and it's just so much narrower. Mm-hmm. A child's foot is very wide, and then as the child grows up, it becomes very narrow. So this was not a child, it was an adult.
Can you explain how it was constructed?
Yes, I'd like to go through the I'll start at the top and go down.
Okay.
So this would be what's be touching the foot. The inner support strap made of cotton, and it was sewn with nylon thread. That's important because nylon really wasn't invented here in our plant till late.
Till when?
It was right at 1947, but give or take a little bit.
But people were not manufacturing shoes on the earth with
not
nylon.
at all. During the war, nylon hose was the rage.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think they was using it in shoe soles, no.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a woven cotton cloth, a urethane foam with a sodium or calcium carbonate, a black rubber material containing clay and carbonated filler, compressed cotton fibers, vulcanized or embedded in 6 angstrom, coated with unknown material, woven cotton cloth, a double warp twill, and then item number 3, a 2/1 basket weave, and at one time it was either red or maroon dyed cotton cloth, a woven cotton cloth, compressed cotton fibers embedded or vulcanized into the bottom sole, and then it had a rubber sole made from plant pitch or oil such as lecithin, contains a clay and calcium carbonate filler pigmented with titanium white. So that is just not the way a normal shoe sole is made.
Those are 9 layers in this small sole of a shoe. Did Mr. Campbell try to find out if there is any manufacturer who has made such a sole?
He has looked for years now, and he has not found anyone that came even close.
And he still got this sole?
Yes, ma'am. I've seen it, and I've held it in my hand.
So Art Campbell presented at Bob and Ryan Wood's conference a year ago about what he had found on the plains of St. Augustine. What have you done in 2004?
Well, during the conference in Aztec, he and I came up with the idea to go back down to the plains of St. Augustine with a crew of men and see if we could find any more items. So we agreed that we would convene on the plains of St. Augustine in June 2004. And we did. There were 9 of us total, my wife and I, Art, and my younger brother, and 5 other people. And we set up 4 large A-frames with movable screen shakers in them. And we also had it where we could change screens easily. And then we started digging.
Like an archaeological dig.
An archaeological dig. But this was more just a dig, because an archaeological dig goes through all the scientific stuff, and what we were after, we was wanting to find if we could find something.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's plenty of room left there for the archaeologists to come in and do a scientific dig. We didn't even scratch the surface of what all was there.
What did you find?
We found a number of pieces of metal, and it's an aluminum alloy, anywhere from 17 microns thick up to 1,400 and, well, let's say 1,500 microns thick.
Mm-hmm.
And we found several pieces, and I had 6 of them analyzed at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology.
Right.
And this stuff is not common.
What did they find?
They found that by using an area method versus a chemical method of analyzing it, they found that it was about 91% aluminum, 6% iron, and 3% silicon.
Silica, which is a quartz.
I'm sorry, I used that.
It's a quartz sand silica. And did the lab have any suggestion about any other earth-based material that would be like that?
No. They just didn't know where it would have come from. I have talked to 2 gentlemen that are retired with about 40 years each from Alcoa Aluminum about this composition. And there is, Alcoa started just a few years ago, roughly 10 years ago, with an 8,000 series of compounds that have silica, iron, and aluminum. But there's only 3 compounds, and one of them has a maximum, or formulas, that has a maximum amount of 0.5% of silica.
Well, why is it that Alcoa started making a product that had these 3 ingredients?
Not a clue of why they do that.
But it's only recent that they've started manufacturing.
Yeah, it's very recent, within like 10 years or so, 15. There are other parts and pieces we just really don't know what are. But I'd like to describe one item that Mr. Campbell found that is extremely intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a plastic. And when you first look at it, it looks like it was a quart oil can or oil jug that was melted down. But whenever you first start looking at it, and he's had it analyzed with an MRI, and it's got many, many chambers in it. And also, whenever they started looking at it and picking pieces out of it, they found a microscopic gold wire. And this gold wire had a fitting on it, like maybe you put 2 of them together. But in the process, they were not expecting this gold wire, and it's so microscopic they never could find it again. But fortunately, before they started moving it, they took a picture of it.
Right.
But they do have copper wires that came out of this plastic thing that are just microscopic, almost to the nano part, I think, like many times smaller than a human hair.
One of the most interesting parts of the research that Chuck Wade has done with Art Campbell this year in taking these pieces that they found at the plains of San Augustine to a lab and finding that there was silica and iron mixed with the aluminum, and learning that basically silica and aluminum would not mix together in any kind of normal fashion. And at earthfiles.com, I have a series of photographs of 6 of these fragments that went to the lab with microscopic blow-ups of what they have found. And Whitley, it is one of the most interesting things because it reminded me a little bit of the layered bismuth magnesium that I spent so much time investigating in this regard. That when you look at these thin pieces of metal, and we're talking 17 microns, 30 microns thick. They're the width of and a little bit thicker, some of them, than, say, normal kitchen tinfoil in the modern world. But there seems to be very specific distributions of the silica and the iron inside of the aluminum, as if it has a design. And when you look at these microscopic pictures, which the scientists at New Mexico Institute also, they commented, there seems to be a deliberate distribution within the aluminum that is extremely, in terms of today's world, very unusual. So there's much more to be learned about these new pieces from the plains of San Augustine, and to me, it reinforces that on April 9th, 1983, I sat at Kirtland Air Force Base. I was presented an alleged briefing paper for the President of the United States on crashed discs, and on that list, beyond Roswell, was Magdalena in the plains of San Augustine. And as controversial as that has been over the years, I think that Chuck Wade and Art Campbell are coming up with some of the harder physical evidence that we've needed to go to a lab, and a lab to say, this is a very uncommon metal. It has not been proved to be extraterrestrial, but is highly strange. And there is one more almost poignant artifact that Art Campbell found at this, what he thinks is a crash site on the plains of San Augustine. He found 2 pieces of natural wood crossed, bound together by wire, extremely old, extremely weathered, right where he thinks that whatever this was came down. And he figured that it might have been left there either by local residents back in 1947 to honor the dead beings that were supposed to be associated with this crash. And here now again, briefly, is Chuck Wade talking about that cross and the possible being?
He found this cross there. It wasn't readily available to start with, but he did find this cross, and it was wired together like this. And it turned out that this cross was over where the main crash must have landed. So somebody came years ago and paid homage to those folks. And Mr. Campbell has a nice picture of this laying there. And rather than just leave it out there in the weather where it could possibly get taken or whatever, he took it several hundred yards away and put it in a tree. And this was maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And I think that this is so telling of paying homage to the...
Well, when you say those folks, did you get a description from anybody about bodies?
From what I have researched and heard from others, there were bodies associated with this crash there on the plains of St. Augustine. And right before Barney Barnett, who was the civil engineer for the Soil and Water Board in that district of New Mexico, Barney told his friends, Martha and Harold Baca, they were next door neighbors, about the little people from that crash. And that's just about all he said. He just wouldn't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Barney has a niece named Alice Knight,
mm-hmm.
and Alice remembers Barney very well, and that he was versed in astronomy. And this is what Alice Knight says: "What an irony that a man as well versed in astronomy as Barney had come upon one of the greatest finds of his time, but was not allowed to tell others." And that seems to be the whole scenario of these crashes. People are just not allowed and will not talk about these crashes. And that's one of the reasons, Linda, I am absolutely so glad that we are speaking, because I want people to know that the crashes at Corona and the St. Augustine are real.
And that is the theme of this weekend in Las Vegas at the second annual UFO Crash Retrieval Conference organized by Bob and Ryan Wood. I don't think anyone could have said it better than Chuck Wade, and he will be speaking there this weekend about some of this and more. And I think that his appeal is something that you and I and so many others feel so deeply, that we should have a right to know about these crashes and these other entities.
I certainly feel it very strongly, Linda. Linda, I'd like to thank you for a terrific report.
Dreamland. Welcome to one of the world's greatest mysteries, the mystery of Fulcanelli and the Secret of Alchemy. Jay Weidner has been on the trail of Fulcanelli and the Secrets of Alchemy since 1986. In his book, The Mysteries of the Great Cross of Hendaye and a Monument to the End of Time, Jay cracked the code of this mysterious pillar of Hendaye. He used that pillar as a needle to thread together a profound tapestry of secrets about our galactic center and this very moment in time in which we live. Jay's a Hermetic scholar, he's a filmmaker, and a husband to the beautiful Sharon Rose. A Dreamland favorite, he returns with his Fulcanelli-inspired must-see DVD, Secret of Alchemy, The Great Cross and the End of Time. And you need to get it from the Unknown Country store right now. Buy the DVD. Watch it. What Jay is offering is a major clue to the mystery of our times. Jay, welcome to Dreamland.
Hey, William.
Hey, it's great to have you here. How are you?
I'm great. It's really great to be here.
Yeah, it's a nice turn of events for me. I remember back in August 1999 going to Boulder, Colorado to hear a lecture given by you and your writing partner, Vincent Bridges, when the Monument to the End of Time came out. It's great to be here for the unveiling of Secret of Alchemy.
Yeah, well, thanks. That was a great conference that we had back then.
Yeah, it was just absolutely ripe with all kinds of possibilities. Nobody really knew what was going to happen at the time of the millennium, and now here we sit 5 years later. What's your latest take, the forecast on where things are at in terms of fulfillment of prophecies and the era that we're moving into presently?
Well, it's
new listeners, Jay, probably even since the last time you were on the program. So let's take a moment to bring everyone up to speed. I'd like to give you a few terms and have you define them for us based upon your research. Let's start with Fulcanelli.
All right. Fulcanelli is really what you might call the last alchemist. As you probably know, but maybe many of your listeners do not know, alchemy is an ancient science that was handed down at least as far back as Egypt. India also had its own form of alchemy. Ancient India and ancient China also had its own form of alchemy. Alchemy is known today to be something that crazed men did to try to change lead into gold, but that's really just a cover story. The real story of alchemy is that it's a science. It's a holistic science that looks at nature and tries to understand what is going on in nature. It doesn't try to break things down. It tries to bring things together. It's kind of the opposite of science. I like to think of alchemy as alchemy today as sort of where science is going. In shedding its ancient mystic origins, alchemy seems to be the only science that is bringing all of the disparate elements of science together. Fulcanelli, who wrote a book called Mystery of the Cathedrals in 1926, appears to be the last of a secret society, I guess. He getting more and more interesting lately. I think that where we're moving would seem to solidify the predictions that the Hendaye Cross and Fulcanelli and others like Nostradamus have made about this time. I think we're moving into a very, very serious time in world history, also a very hopeful time. I think that the recent events since 2001, 9/11, have given us all pause. I think that also that 9/11 is probably going to go down as a seminal event in world history, changing everything that's occurred afterwards, and including the last election last week. I think that all these things are culminating into something that is so big and beyond anything that's happened before that I can only stand in awe of Fulcanelli's predictions from 1926 and the Cross of Hendaye's predictions from almost 400 years ago. And when you include that in with the fact that every year since 1992, the weather has gotten much worse. The heat every year is hotter than the year before. There are weather storms that shouldn't be, tornadoes in the south, and more hurricanes than ever. The whole thing begins to seem as if something's unraveling, and I think that something is history itself.
Yeah, well said. We have a lot of...
In the end, Fulcanelli is telling us that this science that once existed everywhere is far more profound and advanced than our modern science is. And that was intriguing, and so I began trying to understand what alchemy really was as opposed to what the mythology was saying. And I think that's where all of the work that I do stems from, is that trying to understand what alchemy is and what is the message that Fulcanelli is trying to tell us.
Very good. In 1957, the second edition of Fulcanelli's The Mystery of the Cathedrals was published. Strangely, it contained a new chapter not present in the original 1926 edition. It described an enigmatic cross in Hendaye, France that remained unsolved, and I believe its message lost to history unless and then perhaps you and your writing partner, Vincent, come along and devote your life to solving it. Tell us about the cross at Hendaye, Jay.
Yeah, the Cross of Hendaye really is the most intriguing thing that I've ever come across. No one knows who built it. It's at least 350 years old. It sits in a churchyard in a little small town in Hendaye, France, which is on the border with Spain. Louis XIV was married at Hendaye. Hitler visited the cross in 1940. Many strange people passed their way through Hendaye on their way to the alchemical schools of Spain. say, in the 1200s and the 1100s. So Hendaye repeats over and over in his book, Mystery of the Cathedrals, that he's nearly breaking his sacred vows by telling the reader the information. And so we can assume from this that Fulcanelli is a member of a group of ancient order that is preserving the knowledge in certain ways. One of the ways that they preserve knowledge is through monuments like Notre Dame Cathedral or the Great Pyramids even are really alchemical monuments. And so he wrote this book as kind of what I call the message in a bottle. He threw it out into the ocean and hoped that someone would eventually recover the message, decipher it, and figure out what he was saying. For some reason, no one really was interested in deciphering the message. They were more interested in who Fulcanelli was. Since he was anonymous, this created an intrigue, and many people went after that mystery. I was not all that interested in his anonymity. I was more interested in what it was he was saying, and for some reason, Vincent and I appear to be the only two people who really were interested in what Fulcanelli was trying to say. So, in its own way, our two books are really the only analysis of Mystery of the Cathedrals and its intrinsic meaning, and there's very little concern in the books about who Fulcanelli was. So, Fulcanelli was a very, very, very smart man who knew far more about this world than it seems possible at the time that he wrote the book, 75 years ago, 80 years ago now. So,